The silence before the truth. The night was calm, yet the city lights carried a quiet sadness. Cameras flashed outside an old theater where the charity gala had just ended. People smiled, laughed, took pictures, and left. But behind the glitter and fame, something much deeper was happening. Something that no one noticed until years later. Keanu Reeves stood near the back exit, away from the noise, holding a simple paper cup of coffee. His black suit was wrinkled from hours of standing, and his eyes seemed lost somewhere far beyond the night sky. For most people, he was the calm, mysterious man they admired. But tonight he was just tired of being seen and not known. Sandra Bullock walked quietly down the hallway behind the stage. She had smiled through the whole evening, given her speech, hugged people she barely knew, and now she just wanted to breathe. When she saw Keanu standing alone, her steps slowed. They hadn't spoken much in years, not since that project that changed everything. The project that everyone thought brought them close, but in truth pulled them apart in ways no one understood. She hesitated, then whispered softly, "You always find the quiet corners, don't you?" Keanu turned, his lips forming a small, gentle smile. "It's where the truth hides." Her laugh was soft but tired. "And have you found it yet?" He didn't answer. He looked down at the cup in his hand. The coffee had gone cold. For a long moment, they stood in silence, surrounded by the faint echo of a closing event. The crew packed up cables, stage lights flickered off, and only two people remained in that dim backstage. Two souls connected by something neither of them ever named. Finally, Sandra spoke again. "I saw your interview last week," she said. "You said kindness is the only real success." "People loved it," Keanu smiled faintly. "But the people who really need to hear it never do." That sentence hit her harder than she expected. She realized how much pain was hidden in his calm words. She remembered the film set years ago, the long nights, the quiet talks, the laughter they shared when the camera stopped rolling. She remembered how everyone thought they were falling in love. Maybe they were, but not in the way people imagined. It was deeper, built on respect, on silence, on kindness that never asked for credit. But something happened after that movie. Something that none of them talked about. "Not even today, Keanu," she said gently. "Why did you leave without saying goodbye?" He didn't look at her. Instead, he stared at the stage door where faint light from the street leaked in. "Because sometimes goodbye is the kindest thing you can say," he replied. Sandra's eyes softened, and the ache in her chest grew heavier. She wanted to ask more, to understand what he meant. But before she could, a voice called from the hallway. "Mr. Reeves, your car's ready." He nodded slightly. Then he turned to her. "You did great tonight, Sandra. The foundation means a lot to you, doesn't it?" "It's not about me," she said. "It's about what we leave behind." Keanu smiled again, but his eyes carried a shadow of something deeper. Regret, maybe. Or love buried under years of silence. As he walked away, Sandra watched him go, her heart pounding with words she could never say. The sound of the door closing behind him felt like the end of something important, something unfinished. Outside, the rain had started to fall lightly. Keanu stood beside the car, looking up at the sky. Memories came rushing back, the day they met, the laughter between scenes, the quiet kindnesses that no one saw. He remembered the day she cried in the trailer, overwhelmed by fame, and he had simply handed her a cup of tea, saying nothing. He remembered her kindness, too, the way she had sent food to the crew when he couldn't afford gifts, the way she smiled at strangers on the street. But there was one moment that still haunted him, one truth that no one knew, and that truth was the reason he had walked away. As the car drove off into the wet streets, Keanu whispered to himself, "Some kindness comes too late." Meanwhile, Sandra stayed backstage, staring at the empty chairs. She found a small folded paper on the table where Keanu had been standing. Curious, she opened it. It was a receipt, faded and torn from a children's hospital dated many years ago. At the bottom was written in pencil, paid in full, anonymous. Her heart skipped a beat. She remembered that hospital. She had visited it once after their movie premiere. A sick little boy there had told her about an unknown man who paid for his surgery. The staff never revealed the name, At that time, she didn't think much of it. But now, her hands trembled. Could it have been Keanu? Her eyes filled with tears as she folded the paper back. That single faded note brought back 1,000 memories, and suddenly, the silence of the empty room felt louder than applause. In that moment, she realized something. Maybe the story between them wasn't over. Maybe it had never even been told. As the lights went out one by one, Sandra whispered into the darkness, "You never stopped being kind, did you?" And somewhere out there in the rain, Keanu Reeves was thinking the same thing, only about her. Because the truth was simple. They both kept giving, quietly, endlessly, without ever telling the world. And that shared kindness was the bond no rumor or time could ever break. But the world would soon find out that their story wasn't what people thought. It wasn't about love or fame. It was about something much more powerful, unfinished kindness that would one day change countless lives, and that journey was only beginning. The letter that never reached. The next morning, the sun broke through soft clouds over Los Angeles, painting golden light across the hills. Sandra Bullock sat by her kitchen window with a cup of tea that had long gone cold. The small folded hospital receipt lay on the table beside her. She hadn't slept all night. Her thoughts kept circling back to Keanu, his quiet tone, his tired eyes, and that single sentence that refused to leave her mind. Sometimes goodbye is the kindest thing you can say. She looked down at the faded receipt again, her fingers tracing the smudged handwriting. Paid in full, anonymous. She whispered the words under her breath, almost afraid that saying them aloud would make them disappear. In her heart, she already knew the truth, but part of her didn't want to believe it. Part of her needed proof. She took a deep breath, picked up her phone, and called an old friend, Dr. Elena, the woman who had run that children's hospital years ago. "Sandra?" Elena's voice came through, warm but surprised. "It's been forever. What made you remember me today?" Sandra hesitated for a moment before answering. "That hospital, the children's wing. Do you still have the old donation records?" "Most of them, yes." "Why do you ask?" "I found something," Sandra said softly. "A receipt from your hospital. No name. Just kindness." The line went quiet for a few seconds. Then Elena said, "You should come by. I think you deserve to know the story behind that one." 2 hours later, Sandra stood in front of the same hospital she had visited years ago. It looked older now, the walls carrying stories of healing and heartbreak. As she walked through the hallways, memories came rushing back, the laughter of children, the smell of disinfectant, and the soft beeping of monitors that once filled her with sadness and hope at the same time. Elena met her in the lobby with a warm hug. "You look just like you did the day you came to visit the kids," she said with a smile. "Still carrying too much in your heart," Sandra smiled faintly. "I guess some hearts never learn how to stop caring." They walked together to Elena's office. She opened a metal drawer filled with old files, flipping through them until she found a folder marked Year of the Storm. "That was the year we almost shut down," Elena said. "We were running out of funds." Then one night, an anonymous donor cleared the entire debt of the children's wing. No publicity, no name, no calls. Just a handwritten note that said, "This is for the ones who still dream." Sandra's eyes filled with tears. She didn't need to ask who it was. She just knew, Elena continued. "The only clue we ever had was the envelope. It came from a post office near the old movie studio where you filmed The Lake House." She looked at Sandra with a small smile. "I always thought it was someone from your crew. Maybe I was right." Sandra pressed her lips together to stop them from trembling. The Lake House. That was where it all began, where she and Keanu had first shared something beyond friendship. Long talks about loneliness, kindness, and how fame made people forget what really mattered. She remembered him sitting by the lake one evening, sketching quietly on a napkin. When she asked what he was drawing, he said, "A bridge between hearts that never met in time." Now she realized he had meant it. "Thank you, Elena," she whispered. "I think I finally understand." That evening, Sandra sat at her desk with a pen and a piece of paper. She began to write. Not a message for the world, not a letter for fans, but a note for one man she never properly thanked. "Dear Keanu, if this letter ever reaches you, Know that I found what you left behind. Not just the receipt, but the meaning behind it. I understand now why you walked away. It wasn't distance. It was love expressed in silence. I used to think kindness needed to be seen to matter. But you taught me that the truest kind never asks to be noticed. You gave without letting anyone know, and maybe that's what makes it eternal. There's something unfinished between us. But maybe that's how it's meant to be. Unfinished stories keep hearts alive. Thank you for being kind, even when the world was loud. Thank you for reminding me what really matters. Sandra. She folded the letter carefully and placed it in an envelope. On the front, she wrote his name in small, neat letters, Keanu Reeves. She stared at it for a long time before setting it aside. She didn't know if she would ever send it. Maybe some words weren't meant to be delivered. They were meant to live quietly inside hearts. Miles away, Keanu sat alone in his workshop, surrounded by motorcycle parts and half-finished projects. The sound of rain against the tin roof filled the silence. He picked up an old photo frame from the shelf. It was a candid picture from the lake house set. Sandra was laughing, holding a cup of coffee, sunlight hitting her hair just right. He remembered that day vividly. She had spent her lunch break teaching a child from a nearby school how to paint. When the child accidentally spilled paint on her dress, she just laughed and said, "Real color never fades, it just moves." He smiled at the memory. She was the kindest person he had ever met. He didn't know that at that exact moment. She was thinking the same thing about him. As he placed the photo back, a small notebook fell from the shelf. It was his old travel journal, the one he had written in during the quiet years after the lake house. He opened it, and there it was, a half-finished sentence on the last page. Some stories don't end. They pause, waiting for courage to return. Keanu closed his eyes for a moment. Maybe it was time to stop pausing. Maybe the unfinished story between them still had something left to say. He reached for his phone, scrolled through his contacts, and stopped at her name. His thumb hovered over the call button. But before he could decide, the phone buzzed with a new message. It was from an unknown number. "Mr. Reeves, this is from the Children's Hospital. We're preparing a thank you event for past donors. We recently learned who you were. We'd love for you to come." His heart skipped. How did they find out? He had done everything to stay anonymous. He typed back, "Please don't mention my name. I'll come quietly." That same night, Sandra got a call too. "Miss Bullock," said Elena's voice, "we're holding a small event to honor the anonymous donor. I know you'd want to be there." Sandra smiled faintly. "Yes, Elena. I think I should." Two hearts, moving toward the same place again. Without knowing it, fate had just set the stage for their unfinished kindness to meet once more. And this time, silence wouldn't be enough. The reunion no one expected. The evening of the event arrived with soft clouds drifting across the Los Angeles sky. The Children's Hospital was decorated with white lilies, paper lanterns, and pictures of smiling kids whose lives had been changed by kindness that no one had seen coming. The air smelled faintly of rain and hope. Inside, nurses and volunteers rushed around with excitement. Banners read "Celebrating Unseen Hearts." Soft music played from the corner of the hall, where a young boy practiced on an old violin. It wasn't a glamorous event. No red carpets, no flashing cameras, just simple gratitude in the air. Sandra Bullock arrived early, dressed in a plain beige dress with her hair tied back. She wanted to blend in, not to be noticed. She greeted the staff and hugged Elena, who was overseeing everything. "You made it," Elena said warmly. "I'm glad." "I wouldn't miss it for anything," Sandra replied softly. She didn't ask who the donor was. Part of her didn't want to ruin the quiet beauty of the moment by forcing the truth out too soon. She wanted to feel it when she saw it. Elena smiled and guided her toward a table near the front. "We'll start soon," she said. As Sandra sat down, she looked around the room. The walls were lined with small framed letters written by children and parents who had been helped by the hospital. Each letter was short, simple, and filled with raw gratitude. One letter caught her eye. It said, "Thank you to the man who saved my brother's life. We never saw your face, but Mom says you have kind eyes." Sandra's throat tightened. She whispered, "Kind eyes." And her heart immediately thought of Keanu. Across town, Keanu Reeves was driving slowly through the rain. His motorcycle glided across empty streets, the city lights reflecting on his visor. He hadn't told anyone where he was going. Not his team, not his friends. This wasn't a public moment. He parked a few blocks away from the hospital and walked the rest of the distance under his umbrella. His steps were slow, thoughtful. He almost turned back twice, but something inside him whispered, "Go see what kindness looks like when it grows." When he reached the entrance, a nurse greeted him. "Good evening, Mr. Reeves," she said with a gentle smile. "You're on the guest list." He blinked in surprise. "Please," he said quickly. "No announcements, no spotlight. I just want to sit quietly." She nodded with understanding. "Of course. That's what most kind people say." She led him into the back of the hall. He took a seat near the side door, half hidden behind a column. From there, he could see the stage, but not be easily noticed. The lights dimmed as Elena stepped onto the small stage. She tapped the microphone gently and spoke with warmth. "Good evening, everyone. Tonight we gather not to celebrate fame or wealth, but the quiet hands that build hope. Many years ago, when this hospital was on the verge of closing, an anonymous donor cleared our debts. That kindness saved countless children, and none of us ever knew who to thank. Tonight, by chance, that story comes full circle." Sandra's heart began to race. She stared at Elena, her fingers gripping the edge of the chair. "A few months ago," Elena continued, "we found the original letter he sent. It had no name, but it carried his handwriting. And recently, one of our volunteers recognized the same handwriting on another quiet donation sent to a different hospital. Ladies and gentlemen, our anonymous friend agreed to be here tonight. Not for recognition, but to remind us that kindness never ends when it begins with love." The crowd clapped softly. Sandra froze. Elena smiled toward the back of the hall. "Mr. Reeves, thank you for what you've done." Every head turned. Sandra's eyes widened, her breath caught, and for a moment, the world around her fell silent. He stood slowly, his expression calm but humble. The people began to applaud. No cameras, no reporters, just genuine, heartfelt gratitude. Keanu gave a polite nod and spoke into the microphone briefly. "Please," he said quietly, "don't make this about me." It was never about who gave, it was about who received. "I'm just grateful the children got their second chance." His voice trembled slightly, and Sandra felt her eyes fill with tears. It wasn't surprise. It was recognition. She had always known this was him. When the applause faded, Keanu stepped away from the stage and moved to the back again. He thought he could slip out quietly, unnoticed. But just before he reached the door, he heard a voice behind him. "You never stopped being kind, did you?" He froze. The voice was soft but carried years of unspoken emotion. Slowly he turned around. There she was, Sandra, standing a few feet away, her eyes shimmering under the dim lights. For a moment, neither of them spoke. It felt like time had stopped, like all the noise in the world had faded to silence. "You came," he said softly. "You gave," she replied. A faint smile touched his lips. "It wasn't much. It was everything," she whispered. They stood there quietly, surrounded by people who didn't notice the quiet storm between them. Years of distance, rumors, and missed words now melted into a single look. Sandra finally took a step closer. "Why didn't you tell anyone? You could have inspired millions." Keanu's eyes softened. "If you tell people about kindness, they start clapping. But if you keep it quiet, they start feeling." She couldn't help but smile through her tears. "You always had the simplest way of saying the deepest things." "I learned it from someone," he said. "Who?" He looked straight at her. "You." That single word broke her completely. All the years of silence between them suddenly made sense. All the interviews, all the distance, all the unspoken respect. It was never coldness. It was love expressed in silence. Before either of them could say more, a young nurse approached with a small child by her side. The little girl had short hair and held a drawing in her tiny hands. "Excuse me," the nurse said shyly. "This is Maya. She wanted to give this to you both." Maya smiled shyly and handed the paper to Sandra. On it was a crayon drawing of two people standing under rain, holding a single umbrella together. Above them were the words, Thank you for keeping us dry when the world felt too heavy." Sandra knelt down and hugged the little girl gently. Keanu smiled, his eyes glistening. When Maya walked away, Sandra looked at him again. "You see?" she said softly. "Kindness doesn't go unseen. It just waits for the right time to return." Keanu nodded slowly. "And maybe that time is now." They stood side by side, both quietly overwhelmed by how their paths had crossed again. Outside, the rain began to fall once more. It sounded almost like the world exhaling, a gentle reminder that even unfinished stories can find their way back to the light. What neither of them knew was that this night would soon lead to something bigger, something that would test their hearts again and reveal the truth behind the one kindness they both forgot. The kindness they both forgot. The rain didn't stop that night. It followed them like an old memory refusing to fade. When the hospital event ended, the crowd slowly disappeared into the wet streets. But Keanu and Sandra stayed behind. They walked through the quiet hallways where children's drawings still hung on the walls, their laughter echoing faintly in the distance. It felt strange, after all those years, standing beside each other again, not as actors or public figures, but as two people who had once understood silence better than words. They stopped near a small bench by a window where the rain tapped softly. Sandra turned to him and smiled gently. "You know," she said, "I never sent that letter." Keanu looked at her curiously. "What letter?" She hesitated. "The one I wrote after finding your receipt. I kept it on my desk for days, trying to decide if I should send it. But something told me you'd already understand it without reading it." He gave a small nod. "Sometimes the words we don't send speak louder." She smiled. "You haven't changed," he chuckled quietly. "Maybe a few gray hairs." "No," she said softly. "You're still the same man who listens more than he speaks. And somehow, the world needs that now more than ever." They stood in silence again, listening to the rain. It was peaceful. But beneath that peace, something unspoken began to rise, something they both had buried years ago. Finally, Sandra broke the silence. "Can I ask you something?" "Anything." "That night you left the set without saying goodbye. Was it really kindness you were thinking about, or was it something else?" He turned toward the window. His reflection looked tired, older, but his eyes still carried that quiet honesty she had always admired. "It was both," he said softly. "There was something I couldn't tell you back then. Something I thought would hurt you more than my silence." Sandra frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" Keanu took a deep breath before speaking again. "Do you remember the little girl who used to visit the set during filming? The daughter of the lighting technician?" "Yes," she said, eyes widening. "Her name was Emily. She loved watching us act. She gave me that little origami heart on the last day." Keanu nodded slowly. "A week after we wrapped filming, she was diagnosed with a rare heart condition. Her father couldn't afford the surgery. The studio insurance didn't cover it, so I helped." Sandra's eyes filled with emotion. "You paid for her surgery?" "Not just that," he said quietly. "I stayed in touch with her family. But I made them promise not to tell anyone. I didn't want pity or credit. I just couldn't let her story end that way." Sandra felt her heart ache in the most beautiful way. "You disappeared because of that?" "Partly," Keanu said. "The other part was that I thought you already had enough weight on your shoulders. You were dealing with so much after your mother passed. I didn't want to add one more thing." She looked at him with disbelief and tenderness. "You thought protecting me meant leaving me?" He nodded silently. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she whispered, "You didn't protect me by leaving. You just made me miss a chance to stand beside you." The pain in her voice was gentle, not angry. It was the sound of someone realizing that love and kindness, even with the best intentions, can still break hearts when kept too quiet. Keanu lowered his eyes. "I know. I regretted it every day." She stepped closer and placed a hand on his arm. "You did what you thought was right. And maybe that's why I never stopped believing you were one of the good ones." He finally looked up, and for the first time in years, they saw each other fully, not as actors, not as icons, but as two imperfect souls who had tried to heal the world in their own quiet ways. Just then, Elena appeared at the end of the hallway. "Sorry to interrupt," she said gently, "but there's someone who wants to see you both." "Us?" Sandra asked, confused. Elena smiled and motioned for them to follow. She led them to a small room in the children's ward. Inside, a teenage girl sat by the window with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She had a book open on her lap and a soft smile that reminded Sandra of something familiar. "This is Emily," Elena said. Sandra gasped softly. The little girl from years ago, the one with the origami heart, was now almost grown. Her face was thinner, her hair shorter, but her eyes were full of life. Keanu froze. He hadn't seen her since the hospital years back. Emily looked up and smiled. "Hi," she said shyly. "I've seen you both in movies, but I remember something else too." "What's that?" Keanu asked softly. "You gave me hope before I even knew what that word meant," she said. "You both did." Sandra knelt beside her, tears forming in her eyes. "How are you feeling?" "Better," Emily said. "I still come here sometimes to read to the younger kids. I tell them about how kindness saved me. They don't believe me when I say it was from people they see on screen." Keanu smiled faintly. "That's because kindness doesn't wear a costume." Emily laughed softly. "I guess not." Then she pulled something out of her book. It was that same paper heart she had given Sandra years ago, now carefully laminated to keep it from tearing. She handed it to Keanu. "I want you to have this," she said, "because sometimes we forget the kindness we give away, but it always finds its way back." Keanu stared at the small heart in his hand, speechless. He felt something deep shift inside him, like the years of guilt, silence, and distance had finally found a voice. Sandra looked at him, eyes glistening. She's right. Kindness never really leaves. It just waits for its moment to return. For a while, the three of them sat together, no words, just quiet gratitude filling the room. Outside, the rain softened and a soft beam of light broke through the clouds, touching the window like a promise. As they left the room, Sandra whispered, "You know, Keanu, maybe the kindness you gave away wasn't the only unfinished story. Maybe ours isn't either." He turned to her slowly, his voice barely a whisper. "Maybe it's time to finish it." But destiny had other plans. Because before that could happen, the next morning would bring a message neither of them expected. Something that would change the meaning of kindness forever. The message that changed everything. The next morning, the soft warmth of the previous night faded into a gray stillness. The rain had stopped, but the air felt heavy as if it carried something waiting to be revealed. Sandra woke up early, her thoughts still lingering on Emily's face, on Keanu's quiet voice, and on that paper heart that now rested in his hands. For the first time in years, she felt peace, but also a strange feeling deep inside, something that whispered that the story wasn't done yet. She poured herself a cup of coffee, sat near the window, and looked out at the still streets. The city was waking up, unaware that somewhere across town, another chapter of kindness was about to begin. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Elena. "Call me when you can." "It's about the hospital, urgent." Sandra's heart skipped. She called right away. "Elena? What's wrong?" Elena's voice was calm but heavy. "The hospital's new sponsor just pulled out. We were counting on that funding for the children's wing expansion. We might have to close some of the recovery units again." "What? How can that happen after last night?" Sandra asked, her voice shaking. "The event was perfect. Everyone was so inspired. Inspiration doesn't pay the bills," Elena said softly. "And now we're left with half a promise." Sandra was silent. She knew what Elena meant. Good intentions often fade when the spotlight moves on. "Please don't worry," Sandra said finally. "I'll figure something out." After the call ended, she sat in silence for a long moment. Then, without thinking, she picked up her phone again, this time to call Keanu. He answered on the second ring. "Hey." His voice was calm, low. "Did you talk to Elena yet?" "No, why?" "The hospital funding fell through," she said. "They're in trouble again." He was quiet for a moment. She could almost hear him thinking, "How much do they need?" He asked finally. "A lot," she said. "Millions." "But Keanu, you can't." "I didn't say I would," he said softly. "I said we will," Sandra blinked, caught off guard. We? You and me, he said. Not as actors, not as names, just as people who owe kindness back. How? We'll find a way. Something real. Something that doesn't look like charity. Sandra smiled faintly. You already have an idea, don't you? Maybe, he said. Meet me tonight at the old studio. That evening, Sandra drove to the quiet outskirts of the city where the old movie studio still stood. It had been years since they filmed there. The building looked tired now, forgotten by time. But as she stepped inside, she found Keanu standing near the same spot where they had once filmed the lake house's final scene. There was a small projector beside him, flickering light against the cracked walls. You brought me to the past, she said with a small smile. The past still has lessons, he replied. Watch this. He pressed play. On the wall appeared clips of children from different hospitals, schools, and orphanages. Each one was talking about how small acts of kindness change their lives. A toy, a meal, a visit, a smile. None of them mentioned money. None of them said names. It was all about human connection. Sandra watched in silence as one little boy said, The man who fixed our roof never told us his name. But Mom says angels don't leave business cards. The video ended and the room fell silent. I filmed this over the last few years, Keanu said softly. Every time I traveled, I met people who were saved by someone's kindness. And most of those people didn't even know each other. They just passed it forward. Like a chain, Sandra looked at him, speechless. What if, he continued, instead of asking for donations, we built something where people could exchange kindness directly, an open space, digital or real, where one act inspires another, and no one knows who helped who, just like how it began with us. A circle of kindness, she whispered. He nodded. Exactly. Not charity, not fame, just continuity. She smiled, her eyes glowing softly. And you already have a name for it, don't you? He hesitated for a moment, then said quietly, Unfinished. Sandra tilted her head. Unfinished? Yeah, he said. Because kindness should never end. It should always stay unfinished, she smiled through her tears. You're impossible to argue with. That's why I called you, he said, smiling faintly. You're the only one who can make impossible things happen. They spent the rest of the evening planning, scribbling ideas on notepads and scraps of paper, programs for children, scholarships, volunteer exchanges, art therapy, everything they could imagine. For hours, the old studio filled with new purpose. But just as they were about to wrap up, Keanu's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and froze. What is it? Sandra asked. He didn't answer at first. He just stared at the message, his expression unreadable. Finally, he said quietly, It's from Emily's father. Is she okay? Keanu's voice broke slightly. She's back in the hospital. Sandra felt her chest tighten. Oh no, they said, her heart's failing again. She's asking for us. Without another word, they both rushed out. By the time they reached the hospital, it was past midnight. The hallways were dim and silent. Elena met them near the elevator, her expression somber. She's in room 312, she said softly. She's awake but weak. They entered quietly. Emily lay on the bed, pale but smiling faintly. Tubes ran from her arms and machines hummed softly beside her. She looked up as they approached. You came, she whispered. Of course, Sandra said gently, sitting beside her. We wouldn't be anywhere else. Emily turned her gaze to Keanu. I kept thinking about what you said. That kindness doesn't wear a costume. He smiled gently. That's right. Then promise me something, she said. Anything. Don't stop doing it. Even if people forget. Even if no one says thank you. Just keep doing it. Sandra held her hand tightly. We promise. Emily's eyes fluttered slightly and she whispered, You both gave me more than life. You gave me belief. A single tear rolled down Keanu's cheek. As she drifted into sleep, Sandra looked at him, her voice trembling. We can't lose her, Keanu, he nodded. We won't. But deep down, he knew they couldn't control what came next. They stepped out of the room quietly, standing by the window where the city lights shimmered faintly. She reminded me of us, Sandra said. Two people who never stopped believing that small things could still change the world. Keanu nodded, eyes distant. And she gave it a name. Belief. They stood there for a long time, watching the night fade into a gray dawn. And in that quiet morning light, both silently made a vow. If Emily survived, they would build unfinished in her honor. If she didn't, they would build it anyway, because her kindness already had. The message that changed everything wasn't on a phone or a piece of paper. It was in her soft, fading words. Don't stop doing it. And from that moment, nothing would ever be the same again. The unfinished light, the sun rose gently over Los Angeles, painting soft orange lines across the clouds. The hospital stood quiet, half asleep, holding the breath of countless lives between hope and heartbreak. Keanu Reeves sat by the window of the waiting area, his eyes fixed on the faint shimmer of the dawn. Beside him, Sandra Bullock sat silently, her fingers wrapped around a cold cup of coffee she hadn't touched. Neither of them had spoken for hours. The night had stretched endlessly. Every sound, the hum of machines, the distant beeping, the soft shuffle of nurses, had carried the same fragile question. Would she make it? Finally, Elena appeared at the end of the corridor. Her face was calm, but her eyes were tired. She approached them slowly. She's stable, she said softly, but her condition is critical. The doctors say we might have only a few days. Sandra's eyes filled with tears. Keanu closed his hands into fists, then exhaled slowly. Can we see her? He asked. Yes, Elena said, but she's weak. Keep it short. When they entered the room, Emily looked smaller than before, but her eyes still held that same spark. Gentle, fearless, and kind. She smiled faintly when she saw them. Hey, she whispered. Keanu pulled a chair closer. Hey, little fighter. Sandra sat on the edge of the bed, brushing a strand of hair from Emily's forehead. You scared us, Emily laughed softly. I just wanted to see if you'd come back. Always, Sandra said. There was a moment of quiet as Emily looked at both of them. Remember what you said? About building something called unfinished? They nodded. You should still do it, she whispered. But don't build it for me. Build it for the people you'll never meet. For the ones who think kindness doesn't matter anymore? Her voice was trembling now. Promise me you won't let it end with me. Keanu swallowed hard. We promise, Emily smiled, her hand resting weakly over theirs. Then, it's already begun. Her breathing grew slower, her eyes drifting between wake and dream. She whispered one last thing before falling asleep again, words so soft that they sounded like a prayer. Keep it unfinished. 3 days later, Emily was gone. The hospital halls were filled with quiet mourning. Nurses moved gently, children held candles, and Elena stood by the window, tears silently tracing down her face. Keanu and Sandra stayed for the small farewell service held in the hospital garden. The sky was overcast, the wind cool, carrying the smell of lilies and rain. When it was over, Sandra walked to the small memorial wall and placed the laminated paper heart that Emily had once given her. She pressed it gently against the stone. You gave us the map, she whispered. Keanu stood beside her, silent. His eyes were wet, but his voice was steady when he finally spoke. The world always celebrates noise, he said softly. But she showed us that real change happens quietly. Sandra nodded. And she's right. We can't let it end here. He looked at her. So, what now? She turned to him, her voice filled with calm determination. We start. The weeks that followed were filled with work. No press, no interviews, no announcements. Just effort. They called it the Unfinished Foundation. It began small. A digital platform that connected people willing to help with those in need, without money, without credit, without identity. A teacher offering free lessons, a mechanic fixing a stranger's car, a doctor volunteering weekends, a musician teaching children to play. Every act of kindness logged anonymously, only marked by one symbol, an open circle that meant to be continued. And the first story they shared on the site was Emily's. The video was simple. No music, no editing. Just a short clip of her voice saying, "Don't stop doing it." The response was overwhelming. Messages flooded in from around the world. People started leaving food for strangers, visiting hospitals, planting trees, rebuilding homes, all under the same word, unfinished. In weeks, it grew beyond what either of them imagined. Schools started teaching about it. Universities used it as a kindness initiative. Companies replaced holiday ads with community projects. Even children began writing unfinished at the end of their thank you notes. But through all the recognition, Keanu and Sandra never appeared on camera. They stayed in the background, letting the movement grow on its own. Still, fate had one last moment left for them. Months later, at a quiet event held in the same hospital garden, the staff gathered to celebrate the new children's wing, rebuilt, brighter, and renamed the Emily Ward of Hope. The press had been told that anonymous donors funded it, but everyone secretly knew, as the ribbon was cut. The sun broke through the clouds, flooding the garden with golden light. Keanu and Sandra stood at the edge of the crowd, unnoticed. They watched the children run around laughing, their joy echoing through the courtyard. Sandra turned to him, smiling softly. "You know, you never told me why you called it unfinished." Keanu looked out at the children, then at her. "Because kindness doesn't end with us. It keeps moving. Through people, through time, through moments like this. We'll leave one day, but it won't stop. It'll stay unfinished," she smiled, her eyes glistening. "And that's the most beautiful ending anyone could write," he laughed gently. "Except it's not an ending." "No?" He shook his head. "It's just another beginning." They stood there side by side, watching as one of the children picked up a crayon and began to draw on the pavement. When the child finished, he ran up to Sandra and showed her the drawing. Two people holding hands under a heart, and under it, one word written in big, uneven letters. Unfinished. Sandra's eyes softened. She crouched down and hugged the boy. "That's perfect," she whispered. Keanu watched quietly, his heart full, as the evening sun faded and the first stars appeared. They both looked at the small, glowing hospital behind them, its windows shining like a constellation of kindness across the darkening sky. For the first time in years, they didn't feel like two people from a forgotten story. They felt like two souls who had finally finished what truly mattered by keeping it forever unfinished. And in that silence, filled with warmth and peace, Sandra whispered the last words of their story. "We didn't change the world, Keanu. We just reminded it to be kind again." He smiled, looking toward the stars. "And that's enough." The night grew quiet. The lights glowed softly, and somewhere deep within the city, countless strangers carried on the chain of kindness, each one unaware that it had begun with two people who never wanted credit, only connection. And so their story, like kindness itself, remained forever unfinished.